Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us for another exciting night of Dufferin County Canadian Black Association's Ask Our Expert series. Before I get into tonight's session, I would like to take a moment to pause, reflect, and honor the lives of the 215 Indigenous children whose bodies were recently discovered in a mass grave in BC. I would also like to pause, reflect, and honor the lives of the Muslim family who was horrifically murdered in London, Ontario over the weekend. These events are tragic, unspeakable, and definitely traumatic for all the families impacted, as well as the extended community alike. We're all human, one human race, and our brothers and sisters keepers. And for that, regardless of race, gender, religion, background, we're all in this together. At this moment, I would like us all to take a moment of silence to reflect, to pray, or to simply honor these families. I will let you know when that 1 minute is up. Moment of silence starts now. Thank you. Our minute of silence is now up. Thank you for taking this moment to honor these families and all impacted. Together, we are stronger together. And on that note, I will transition into tonight's agenda. So tonight, we have another exciting event planned for you in partnership with Anthony Stephen Benjamin from Benjamin Law. But before I introduce our honored guest, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself to you and the association. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alethea O'Hara Stevenson, President and founder of the Dufferin County Canadian Black Association. On behalf of the entire team, I'd like to thank each of you for coming out tonight, for showing your support, and most importantly, to be informed. The Dufferin County Canadian Black Association is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to demonstrate leadership and advocacy, provide relevant education, resources, and training to enhance, elevate, and celebrate our Black communities in Dufferin County. Based on our mission, it is no wonder why tonight's legal session, and all our sessions for that matter, are made possible and accessible for the community to elevate, to educate, and to enrich us further. We do have some pre-submitted questions that we will take up as well if we run out of questions to ask. In the event that we don't cover all of the questions, we will make sure that we've captured all of these for you and email them out to all of the participants so that you're not missing any information. And we also have a special announcement for tonight. At the end of the night, we will be doing a draw for a lucky supporter for one of our garden plots in the Shelburne Community Garden. So if you live in Shelburne and if you have attended at least one of our events, you may just be a winner. So make sure you stick around. And finally, we plan to close off the session at 8 o'clock on time. So please make sure that you leave your comments and your feedback in the chat session before you leave. So without further delay, it is my honor to introduce Mr. Stephen Benjamin. Anthony Stephen Benjamin started his practice with the belief that every person should be properly represented. Anthony worked at the Financial Services Committee with the Attorney General of Ontario, where he saw a gap of treatment for some claimants by the insurance companies and wanted to represent those who might otherwise be intimidated by the complex world of personal injury law. Mr. Benjamin has over 10 years of experience, which he brings to bear on every case to ensure that you are fairly treated and justly treated. He has resolved thousands of cases during his tenure. Some of his accomplishments include he was called to the bar in 2001, opened his private practice in 2010. In 2018, he was voted the best Black lawyer by Black's People's Choice Awards. And in 2019, he is or was the recipient of the 2019 Professional Achievement Award by Afro Global Television and Silver Trust. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, please, you can use your emoji to send hearts or to use the clap feature or simply do a virtual clap to welcome Mr. Stephen Anthony Benjamin to our virtual stage. Mr. Benjamin, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Okay, certainly, it's certainly a pleasure to be here to try and share some of my knowledge. I should say there was something that I forgot before. A long time before I practiced on my own, I worked on Bay Street. I was actually a commercial lawyer for quite a few years as well. But I choose to go in a very limited area of practice. But anyway, for tonight, I practice primarily, my firm do primarily personal injury, medical malpractice, employment, and real estate. But I wanted to talk, before I get into my sort of specific subject area, in the last year, because of the COVID, there are some specific areas that I think has significantly affected the community. And I saw a lot of people were just not prepared and fully understood. And one of them I would like to talk about very early, which I think everybody should have, especially if you're a property owner or you work in or if you have kids. I think it's very important that you should have a will done. Everybody should do a will. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Don't do one online. Don't do the will kits. It's too risky. I think you should, get a lawyer. I think it costs a couple $100. The effect of the will is to provide for your family in the event that anything happens, or to dispose of your assets. And it's very simple. It just requires that you get an executor who will manage your affairs, and you know exactly what property you have and designate the beneficiary. And the will is basically speaks after you pass it. I mean, I don't want to be morbid about it, but I'm seeing so many situations where people, some of them have businesses and assets, and then they pass, and then there's a scramble. One, if you don't have an executor, the bank would not deal with you. Number one, it becomes really, really problematic. I had a client who passed away recently, and they couldn't get money to the account to pay the bills or to pay any of the estate expenses because the bank would not release funds. But if there's an executor, that executor can present the will and at least get access to some assistance. So I think, you should find your lawyer or find whoever, a friend, and get one done. One of the other things I need to talk about that has affected people is the power of attorney. It's a very cheap document. I do it for my clients for free, but my existing clients, not the public, but I think it costs like less than $100. And what a power of attorney is giving somebody else the power to act on your behalf. And I think everybody should do one with, there are two types. One to address your property. So if you are ill, someone can go to the bank, they can do your banking, they can do, they can interact with the city, deal your property taxes, interact with the employer or any third party. And then there's one for health, which is very important because I've seen a lot of my clients who unfortunately got ill with COVID and some of the long haul effect. And there's a scramble to see who will make a decision in respect to the doctors, because sometimes if you don't have a direct spouse, or sometimes people may be separated, there are about 5 people who are in a position to make a decision. So it's always good to figure out who among my family or friends I want to make a decision for me if at any point I'm incapacitated. I don't want to be like a prophet of doom, but I think everybody should have, a will and power of attorney. Just do it simplest form and keep it in an envelope somewhere. It's very good. And one of the other things I'm seeing a lot of people don't have, especially is like basic life insurance. Your financial advisor would advise you on that, but I suggest people have at least some minimum insurance in the event of their passing. There will be your assets, there will be funds left for burial and for a lot of other stuff. That was just my take on that. They're not difficult. But I think it's very important that everybody, especially in our community, we do not like to plan for these things. But COVID has has shown how bad it is. I am dealing with that literally every day, because sometimes people get sick and they can't give me instructions, and there is nobody who's competent for me to listen to. And unless you have a power of attorney, I would not deal with the person. You can't tell me you're somebody's wife. I said, okay, fine. Where is your power of attorney? And if you don't have it, I said, sorry, I can't deal with you. But it's important, and the wills are very important, because sometimes somebody passes away. If there's an executor, somebody can apply to manage their estate. Where there is no where there is nobody to manage the estate, where there is nobody to manage the estate and you don't leave a will, you have to do what you call a letters of administration. That is, you need to get a relative to apply. But that causes so many confusion, because sometimes 3 or 4 people want to apply and nobody wants to allow anybody else to apply, and they just leave everything, the estate, in a mess. So just to clean up your act, call a lawyer, just do a will. We do wills too, but I'm not pitching any, I'm not doing any pitch to anybody tonight. One of the other areas I want to kind of get onto is employment issues that I'm seeing coming up a lot in our community. One of the challenges a lot of people have is that because of COVID and for different reasons, some employers are downsizing. Some people are using it as a reason to get rid of staff, or generally it's something people need to have. What I always say to people, when you get a termination letter from your employer and they set out the terms, quite often it will be a letter where they will set out the terms of your termination, including, how many extra weeks pay that you're going to get. That is severance pay. How long they will retain your collateral as your insurance benefits until they are stopped. A lot of people simply get those letters and sign it. I would say when you get those letters, take a couple $100, get to a lawyer, get advice on it, because you don't have to sign it right away. Because I see a lot of people, especially from the banks and the large companies, they get terminated. And I said, well, they give you 8 weeks, you're entitled to 16 weeks. And I will refuse it, and I write the company and say, sorry, this is wrongful. This is not proper notice. We need to get, we think you need to pay a lot more, especially in cases where you have worked for a company for, let's say, 15 years. And they try to send you home with 12 weeks pay. Sometimes I say, sorry, we need at least 6 months, 6 to 8, at least between 6 months and a year minimum severance pay. So next time you get those letters, don't just sign them and send them in. Get advice on it, especially if you're a more mature employee or worked for a long time, you may be entitled to a lot more benefits if you're being terminated. One of the other things I wanted to talk about too, that a lot of people have been struggling with, is if you work for a company and there's a long-term disability provision in your plan, that is, due to stress, psychological issues, a lot of people are unable to work. Don't be afraid to trigger that provision so that you would get, because a lot of the plans provide for between 66 and a third percent to 90% of your income. And depending on the company, it may be tax-free. So if you're not well, or if you have an issue and you need to take time off work, beyond your sick leave, you may have, normally the typical company that manages maybe Manulife, Sun Life, Great West Life, and you have access to long-term disability. And it's not difficult to get. You consult your family doctor. He may refer you to a specialist who will complete the forms. And it doesn't affect your employment. Somebody cannot terminate you because you're not well. And I say to people, don't try to work when you're suboptimal, because you then give the employer legitimate reason because of performances to terminate you. So that's something you should keep in mind. How do I use the short-term and long-term disability in respect of your employment with an employer? One of the other issues I wanted to talk about is just current things that keep happening. There are a lot of funds out there for a lot of the community, like there's now the Black Entrepreneurship Fund, and then there was the $40,000 fund for small businesses. A lot of my clients never qualified for it. And when I went back, what I found was what I call the sort of twin evils. That is, one, nobody incorporates their business, either as a corporation or as a sole proprietorship. Secondly, nobody files their financial statements. Nobody prepares financial statements. And a lot of people don't file their taxes. Because if you're going to deal with any organizations or any benefits, it's important to file your taxes every year. If it's a corporation, you need to have the financial statements ready by June of every year. That 30th, I think it's how much days June have, 31st. You have to file it with Revenue Canada and get it done, because a lot of the programs require that you get it. And even if you're self-employed or if you're employed with a company, file your notice of assessment, file your taxes, because sometimes people come to me with claims and I said, okay, they will say, okay, I have a loss of income. And they can't. I said, okay, well, where is your notice of assessment? Did you file your taxes? Is there a way to prove it? And 90% of them, they can't, because they never filed it. And I should say one thing, let me use this to say one thing on that, which is a warning, especially a lot of people are self-employed. Do not significantly underreport your income. Because if something happens to you, the benefit that you get is directly related to your income. Because a lot of people operate small businesses and they would try and declare a very small net income. It's one thing to do that, but remember, if I have a personal injury claim or any claim and I'm claiming loss of income, it is your net income, not your gross income, that they use. So people tell me, oh, I made $200,000. I said, okay, that's gross, but you declare 10,000 net, and that is what matters. So those are things people should keep in mind, and a lot of it is bookkeeping, because a lot of the claims I do, the biggest problem is the bookkeeping part of it. People cannot prove anything. So, those are just tips that I wanted to give to people. In respect of the specific work I do specifically a lot of personal injury work, where I represent people who had a slip and falls. It could be critical illness policies, sometimes travel insurance, but a lot of my work is motor vehicle accidents. And it's a very complicated, stressful area to prepare. And unfortunately, our community is not prepared for that area of litigation. Because, for instance, if you're driving a car, for instance, and as soon as there's an accident, there are a lot of information you need to collect immediately on the site. Like, you need to get the vehicle, you need to get the driver's information, his driver's license, you need to get the driver's insurance, you need to take a copy of his plate, take your phone, take a picture of the vehicles where they are, and most importantly, go to the collision center and make a report so that you document everything from that fall, because a lot of people don't document stuff. So later on, 2 years, hence, everything becomes very, very problematic in terms of how you pursue those claims. One of the other things with a lot of people, when they have accidents, people think that there's a lot of money to be collected because everybody's watching these commercials. I got a crash, I'm going to get 500,000. Sorry, it doesn't happen that way. I think Steve Anderson is on the call too. He will tell you the system never works that way. It sends you through a very difficult ringer before you could get any recovery. And I should also say too, because a lot of our communities poor history of documenting stuff, they always end up on the wrong end of it. Because if for you to get compensation, you have to prove every aspect of your injury and every aspect of your loss. So you basically need to document your history. If a client comes to me, I will say, okay, fine, I can help you, but you need to go to your family doctor. You need to go to the physio. You need to make notes. You need to follow up on what you're doing. You need to record your income, record your expenses, and be very disciplined, because the court system in Ontario doesn't recognize words, it recognizes black and white and how you've documented everything over the years. I saw a lot of people, that's just my opening intro. A lot of people have sort of asked questions. Altia, I don't know if I should go through and try to answer some of them in the chat. I'm not hearing you.
Of course, the classic I'm on mute scenario.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, so we do have a few questions in the chat. One was from Minerva. What advice would you give to someone who says, I'm his or her husband, wife, so it's automatic that everything goes to me, or I'm automatically the executor because I'm the spouse? So what advice would you have for those individuals?
Well, what I would say to that person by law, if you're the wife or if the person doesn't leave a will, if he leaves you an executor, you could be the wife and your husband could leave his friend as the executor. And whoever is named in the will and the executor manages the estate. If he doesn't leave a will, if you're the spouse, then you automatically are the first person who can apply for the administration of the estate. That is automatically, you have that right if there is no will. But you have to remember, if you don't have a will and you pass, then the rules of, there are some strange rules in terms of succession that applies. That is, a percentage of the property goes to the wife and a percentage go to his children. And children means all children, whether being born in wedlock or not. I've had instances where a client of mine died in a nursing home, died in the hospital, and unknown to the wife, he had 3 kids somewhere in Newfoundland, and these kids turned up. And I had to tell her he didn't leave a will. These kids are equally entitled, just as all the other kids, to the assets, to share in the assets. So it's a big issue. So being a wife is good, but you need a will to preserve your status at all times. Now, being a wife, it also limits what the other spouse could do with your property, because in Ontario, being a spouse, you're automatically entitled to a share in the property anyway. So you won't necessarily be dispossessed, but it's a very, it will take a lot of litigation to preserve those rights. Okay.
Okay, perfect. The other question we have is there a particular age at which you would encourage someone to get a will?
Well, I would say, typically young people don't bother about debt, and they shouldn't. But I would say you should get a will always, but particularly if you're going to get married or if you have kids or you're going to acquire property, anything that would be disposed, that could be disposed of, you should have a will. Because a will speaks after death. A power of attorney, people don't understand, it only operates when you're alive. So you could give your mother a power of attorney to act on your behalf, but as soon as you passed away, that dies. It's a will that you use to dispose of your property after death.
Okay. Is the life insurance policy equivalent to the will?
No, life insurance, what a will is a document that speaks to how you want to dispose of all your property you've acquired during your lifetime. Or it's very important, if you have young kids, you can appoint like a testamentary guardian. Like I always say to people, if you have kids, figure out if something happened to you, God forbid, who you want to take care of your kids. So you can appoint a guardian and a trustee in your will. Also, but a life insurance policy is different. All it is, it pays money to the beneficiary that you have named. If you don't have any beneficiary, it goes to your estate. That's all it is. It's not a will.
Perfect, great questions. So I think one of the things can I ask you to just clarify again, if you don't have a will, then pretty much everyone has equal access to whatever estate you have.
Well, I should go back and phrase it. If you don't have a will, it goes under what you call administration. You have to apply to the court and ask the court to appoint you as administrator. And then the law operates. Everybody by law who has a will, which normally starts with the spouse, then your property goes to the kids. If there's no kids, it then goes up to the parents. And if there's no parents, then the brothers. So the asset goes according to law. But sometimes even if you have a will, wills, that's why it's important to always get a lawyer to do your will. Because sometimes you could do a will and your will could be challenged. Because let's say, for instance, I do a will and I exclude one of my children. that person could challenge the will. Is it somebody who have an obligation to maintain? There's a wider provision that does not allow you to make those punitive selection. But if you're going to do it, you have to specifically say why you're excluding that person. Because that person could file what you call a caveat and tie up your estate for years and claim a share in it. Or sometimes if you have kids and you don't mention them, those are people who you have an obligation, especially minor kids, you have an obligation to maintain those people. So they will have an opportunity to apply to the court to get a share of the property, even if you have a will and you don't mention it. So you always have to deal with it.
Okay, perfect. I'll turn it over to Deputy Mayor Anderson. Steve Anderson is the Deputy Mayor for the town of Shelburne, for those of you who aren't aware. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for the program. I mean, I couldn't not put up my hand after I see my brother here, Mr. Benjamin here online. And I want to talk about the will and just sort of add to what he has said. Maybe I'll just start off by saying this. By not leaving a will, as a parent, and I'm speaking to myself because I don't even have one yet, so I'm not preaching to anybody, I'm really talking to myself as well, is irresponsible. Because at the end of the day, what you're going to create is nothing but more pain and grief for the people that are left behind, and maybe fighting and confusion that could have been avoided if things were done properly and set out properly. Because what it allows, it manages expectations, and you don't have family members fighting over things when things are properly documented. And so Mr. Benjamin spoke about, the pitfalls of not having one, and it's very important to have one, and I'll be getting one soon. I've already spoken to him about securing one for myself. But I had to take the opportunity because Mr. Benjamin is very humble in sort of what he does, and he certainly wouldn't be speaking of these things. And I've known him now for a number of years, having worked with him in a number of cases. But the person that you're looking at right now and you're hearing from is a community champion. It's not just enough to refer to him as Stephen from Benjamin Law. He's a community champion. This is a man who dedicates his time and his resources to benefit our community, time and time again, more so to his expense and his cost. Whether he's working with members in the church, whether he's working with members in the community, whether he's donating his money to the Black Students Association at Ryerson, whatever the initiative is, when you call Steve, he is there. And so I wanted to make sure that that is mentioned. And his law firm, Benjamin Law, is one of the very few Black-owned law firms in the GTA. And what wasn't mentioned is that his two daughters went to law school and are now working with him at his firm. And so what we're talking about here and what we're seeing is Black excellence on display. And so I just want to make sure that we have a full grasp of the man that we are listening today. And I just want to say I appreciate you, brother, coming on and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with the group. Thank you.
Thank you for that additional commentary, Deputy Mayor Anderson. You are absolutely right. He is truly a community advocate, leader, and champion. And so I am truly honored to have him on this platform. But not to take away the spotlight from, our objective for tonight, I will definitely pay my dues to Mr. Benjamin after. But I do appreciate you providing that public acknowledgement. So I'll hand it over to you again, Mr. Benjamin, and you can continue with your commentary, and I have a few additional questions that we can take up after as well.
Okay, in terms of what I wanted to say to people is that, if you have any claim, I will just talk specifically about court matters in general, not necessarily personal injury. If ever you have any interaction with any court systems, the most important thing is documentation. And it's one of the areas in which I find our community is really lacking. And I will tell you, it sounds really bad. Sometimes I have an accident recently where I had two people in a car, somebody from our community and somebody from Asia. The person from our community, I recovered 5,000 from them, the other person 200,000. And the main difference was that person filed their taxes, they visited their doctors, they had all their receipts in respect of their out-of-pocket expenses, from maintaining the yard, from doing everything, hiring third parties. Everything they do was documented. Whereas the person from our community didn't take time to do any of it and found that it was, difficult. And I said to them, listen, you live in Canada. No, if you go to the bank, they're going to ask you for documents. If you go for a job, they will ask you for documents. If you go for anything from a car loan to anywhere, they're going to ask you for a document. So when you have anything, it's important to understand the role of documentation in your life generally. For instance, I am very busy, but I have a scanner. I said a scanner is, in fact, you could put, I tell people there's a free download on your phone called Adobe Scan. Just scan documents and keep them on your phone. Always keep everything because you never know when it would be needed. You need to always document, stuff that you have, like your taxes. You need to file your taxes. You need to get the notice of assessment, keep it. Or no, you don't need to keep it. Revenue Canada allows you access. Set up an account on CRA so you can get access to your taxes and your statements. I think they give you up to 10 years. I'm not too sure. So those are things that you should continually do. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about people is in terms of how you go about retaining a lawyer and how you interact with a lawyer. Quite often, because we come from a culture that is sort of a power-centric, so people will go to a lawyer and they would not ask the right questions. So be it a family lawyer, be it a criminal lawyer, or any lawyer, when you go to a lawyer, one, do the research. Just go online, do the research, ask for a few friends. Establish what is their fee. See if you can get 2 references and try to establish clearly what the lawyer is going to do. Because quite often, a lot of people come to me, especially for personal injury claims, and they will say, well, I work with a lawyer, but what's the lawyer name? They don't know the lawyer name. They didn't take the lawyer's card, and they don't know what the lawyer is doing. And I said, no, that is not it. When you retain somebody, you retain power. You retain a relationship. It's very important to get information on what you're doing. Another thing people do, and like a lot of people, for instance, like I have somebody who does real estate. They're going with an agent to buy. They're going in with an agent to buy a property, and I always tell them, ask questions. If you're going to get a lawyer, find out what are the property taxes, what's the cost of the transaction, because a lot of people call me at the last minute. They can't afford. They want to get a loan to pay for the closing costs. The transfer taxes, the legal fees, and the disbursements. And those are practical things that you really need to always think about when you're dealing or interacting with anything. I'm going to talk general. I'm just talking generally outside of my area. Another area I see a lot of people in our community struggling with is immigration. We use a lot of immigration consultants for a lot of relatives who come from all over the world. And I don't do immigration, but I refer people on continually. And I always say to them, the immigration into Canada it's prescribed. It's not a magic. Don't let somebody have you apply under humanitarian ground or refugee. You don't need to do that. There are a lot of prescribed grounds. Get a proper professional and have them advise you on the best channel to get in. And there are a lot of easy ways to get into Canada that's not very complicated. So in terms of retaining a professional, it's very important in terms of doing the research. One of the other areas I saw a lot of pitfall is in terms of family law, when there's a dispute, a divorce. Now, I never want to speak to that because I don't practice it. But I always say to people, if there's a breakdown in a relationship and you're going to deal with a divorce or any kind of breakdown or custody matter, research, get a proper lawyer. 2, don't try to go cheap because it involves a cost. And set out from the beginning what your goals are, because a lot of clients come to me after 3 years. They're in the middle of a divorce, in the middle of proceedings, and they've exhausted $50,000 and they've gotten nowhere. And they're fighting for stuff that is not possible. And nobody tells them that, because I'm not saying lawyers abuse people, but a lot of lawyers work by fee per hour. So if you're going to be irrational, they will have you paid. So, so my admonition to people in this group is if you're going to retain a lawyer, really think it through and then figure out how you're going to set out that relationship with that lawyer. I think that's all I have to really say, unless there's any other question.
Yes, we do have a few questions in the chat and some that were pre-submitted that I'm hoping we can get to.
Okay.
Can you speak more on the benefits of incorporating one's business?
Well, what I always say to people is, like, I operate a business. I do different stuff. Like, I have properties that I rent. I rent to myself. When you incorporate a property in Canada, what you become, a company is a separate legal entity. And I always tell people, remember Donald Trump. When people say Trump go bankrupt, is not correct. He never went bankrupt. His corporations went bankrupt. A corporation is separate to you. So for instance, anybody here, be it Richie, Smart, Josh, Manova, if you set up a separate company and it's registered and it's called like Smart Limited or a numbered company, that person is separate from you. Whatever that company do, unless it's fraud, you're not responsible. So if you're doing business and you want to protect your personal assets, form a company and do it under that corporation, because if that corporation ends up with debt or has a problem, that corporation could go bankrupt and you could retain your personal assets. The other thing with forming a company, it gives you a lot of tax benefits. For instance, let's say you're running a maintenance or contracting business, or you're providing PSW services. By incorporating, the company has a lot of ability to set off expenses. For instance, if you run a company, part of the mortgage on your house, you could say you use in your house. The accountants will advise you, don't take my advice on this. You could say part of your house expense or your mortgages could be set off against the company as an expense because your house is an office. You could lease a car on your company. You could set off lunches, travel on your company, provided it's for the company's business. So when you set up a company, you're setting up an independent business, and the liability is limited to the company. So somebody sue the company, you could sit down, fly to Jamaica or wherever coast you are and don't be bothered. The company lost and that's it. So it's really protecting yourself. It's a separate person.
That's great advice. Thank you. Moving on to the next question regarding life insurance. After death, what if the insurance company decides not to pay out the set amount per the policy to stated beneficiaries? What steps can one's estate beneficiaries take to ensure they get what they deserve? Well,
I would say one of the common things I found a lot of insurance and critical illness policy, it doesn't come out so much in insurance, but more in travel and critical illness policies. The insurance company will always pay out once you die, except for suicide. When you get problems is where there is what they call disclosure. Like if you're going, I always say to people, if you're going for a life policy, I always tell my family, I always tell the insurance company or the agent, speak to my family doctor and get all my notes. Give them a consent, because what the insurance companies will do, like I have a few cases where, especially with women, some of them, they die later on from cancer and they realize, oh, you had a lymph. When you went, you had a thyroid problem. You didn't, overactive thyroid, you didn't report that. Or, you did a mistake, you did you did different stuff, or you did a pap smear, you did a mammogram and there were findings. And then you died after. Then they said, well, there was a material non-disclosure and therefore the policy is void. So those are things that could void the policies, but most times they can't. Where you tend to catch a lot is the critical illness policies where, little things they are designed not to pay you. So everything you don't disclose become a breach of the contract terms. But life insurance policies, you rarely have any issues. And I would say 98% of the problem is non-disclosure of pre-existing medical condition. Like not disclosing you have diabetes, not disclosing that, they will ask you some innocuous questions like, what did your parents die from? What medication you take? And some people Most people don't take the general medicine because most plans pay for the generic pills. I don't remember. I take some medicine. I don't even know the name of it because they have the sort of, you know, chemical, the sort of names that which is really the, you know, which is really the sort of scientific names, and you don't declare it, and they try to rely on those technical non-disclosure not to pay. But by and large, they will pay if it's challenged in court, unless there's really a material breach, like, you know, you went for cancer screening and, you know, they discover that you have, you know, you had cancer, although it may have been benign or malignant, you didn't tell them. And then you die with a subsequent issue.
That's great advice, because often that's something that you don't think about, right? You do your renewal of your life insurance policy, you know, whether it's every 25 years, but you're not proactive in reaching out to the insurance company and disclosing this information. So now I'm hearing it's in your best interest to reach out and advise if your health status has changed to any extent.
No, sorry, you don't have to tell them your health status has changed. That's the thing with life insurance. The most important thing is your health at the time you purchase the policy.
Okay.
And anything that affects you then that you think will affect your policy, disclose it. If anything happens after, that is the risk you're paying for.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying. Wonderful. The next question is, can the CRA still collect from you for the corporation tax debt?
From you, well, if you do taxes, there is a corporation who is liable for the taxes, not you personally, unless there is some sort of fraud or something that they could allege that you were, you know, a lot of people, for instance, basically defraud the company, and they don't pay. They collect the HST and they transfer it to their personal accounts. So if they do an audit and they see that degree of fraud, they could come after you in respect of that. But if it's a company debt, you know, and then when you run a business, you don't want to have problems with CRA, because the kind of powers they have is that they have draconian powers in respect of freezing your account, freezing your assets. You don't want to get that problem. And next thing with a lot of people, I tell them, don't let accountants or financial advisors get you into these tax avoidance schemes. Because a lot of people get caught, because when CRA audits them 4 years, a year later, they realize that all these charitable gifts that they give and, you know, buy medical supplies for $1 and claim a credit for $20, it doesn't work.
Awesome. I think that concludes all our questions in the chat. I'm going to ask one more that was pre-submitted, and then I'll invite you to share how individuals can get a hold of you. The question is, so often we see advertisements for legal firms saying, you know, we don't get paid until you get paid. How does this really work?
Well, what is called is a contingency fee. So if you retain me, for instance, a lot of the work I do is based on that. And I charge 33% most times. Sometimes I negotiate it. What it means is that if the case doesn't resolve, you don't owe me anything. I don't think I ever collected fees from any client ever in 10 years. If the case isn't resolved, then, you know, you walk away and all my expenses, I lose it. It's a risk. It's a sort of a risk relationship that is allowed by law. So if you retain me to do a personal injury claim or any kind of claim, and I said it's contingent, I only take my fees when it's settled. If it's not settled, I write off everything.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, okay.
One follow-up question to that. Oftentimes individuals shy away from taking legal action due to the perceived expense. What recommendation would you give to individuals to take action?
Well, I would say, you know, be very careful when you're going to take legal action or sue anybody. Because like I do contingency fee, I don't do like hourly rate, but when I work downtown, for instance, I work with a large company, my billing rate was $7.50 an hour, but that's with corporate clients. But if you're going to retain a lawyer to do anything, be it family law, estate, or any other type of litigation, your typical fees is about between $300 and $500 per hour. So, you know, if you're going to retain someone, be very careful on the fees that you're going to pay, and understand in Ontario, fees are very, in Ontario, fees are very high and the court system is very, very slow. So, you could end up spending 20 to 50,000 on a claim. Then there's also the risk that if you lose your claim, you will have to pay the other party's legal fees. So not only would you have to pay your lawyer, you'll have to pay the other party. So you have to know what you're doing and get the proper advice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions from the audience before I go into our next segment? We have 9 minutes left. Okay.
Sorry, I have a quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just for those, and you may have addressed this, I have to step away, Mr. Benjamin. For those who are looking, for maybe some young people who may be online, are looking to get into the profession of law, what are some of the things that they should be looking to do in order to get into that profession?
Great question.
Well, I think the good thing with a lot of the law schools now, for a lot of Black people, there's the Black Law Students Associations, and all the law schools seem to have had somewhere they try to do a lot of reach out to a lot of kids, because a lot of kids, for instance, don't get into law school because they get it wrong from high school. To get into law, basically, you need to have a good undergraduate degree because it's a competitive, I don't know the percentages, but I suspect it's less than 10% of the applicants get in because there's a limited amount of law schools in Ontario. So, your grades need to be good, and then you need to do the LSAT. And it's an expensive, long process, but it's profitable in the long run because a typical lawyer will graduate and they will start at, a young lawyer may start between 70 and 100 and something thousand a year, but it's a long process. Sometimes too, I would say to some people who have kids, if you can't get into a law school in Ontario, you could go to the UK and get into a law school. It's a 3-year program, or if you have a degree before, you can do a 2-year program in a lot of English universities and come back and then do the qualifying exams. It's a longer route, but it doesn't exclude you from getting in.
Perfect. That's great information. Thank you so much. So I'm going to try and do something a little bit different and hopefully exciting. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we're going to do a draw for a community garden plot. So let me try and share my screen. I've never done this before, so please be patient with me. So what I have done is I have entered all of the names. And I don't know. Okay, yes, I can do this. I have entered all of the names into this random name selector list. Are you able to see my screen? Can someone just give me a yes? Perfect. So all of the names of individuals who are from Shelburne and they have at some point in the past 6 months supported or events, I have entered their names in this random selector. So I'm gonna hit spin. Perfect. So Anand Jagdeo is the lucky recipient of our community garden plot. Anand is also a member of DCCBA. So I will reach out to Anand to announce his gift. So thank you, everyone. Oh my gosh, that was exciting. I'm excited. We have about 6 minutes left, and I would like to take this time to thank Anthony Stephen Benjamin for dedicating his time to DCCBA. I know it's not easy to give up a Tuesday afternoon to come and share your knowledge, but as Deputy Mayor Anderson, mentioned earlier in the call, you are a community champion and you've dedicated your time to countless initiatives. And these sessions are important. This is how we grow, this is how we learn, and this is how we elevate and rise together as a community. So I truly appreciate your time, your commitment, your passion, your dedication to enriching the lives of others. So on behalf of the entire team and all of the guests here, I truly thank you for you giving of your time to be with us tonight. I would also like to...
How did you find me?
Perfect, nice segue.
Sorry, people ask how they could find me. You could get onto my, I think I'm online at benjaminlaw.ca. And because I have offices in Toronto, Ajax, and Brampton, nothing in Shelburne yet. Perhaps if I get a lot of work out there, I will come out there. But a lot of our work is done virtually. My office sort of literally runs virtual most times. So we reach people everywhere. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And once we end tonight's session, I will definitely be posting a thank you with contact for Benjamin Law. So you are free to grab that information, share it, and make use of it as you see fit. So before you leave tonight, please be sure to drop your comments in the chat session. You can provide feedback. Again, all of these sessions are made possible, by the generous donations and time from all of our guest speakers and the many organizations that are supporting the Dufferin County Canadian Black Association. If you have feedback for future sessions, of course, we welcome that information as well. So again, thank you everyone for your time. It has been another enlightening session. Thank you for your ongoing support, and stay tuned for our next event on the first Tuesday of July. I don't know the exact date, but we will share that information in advance. That session will be on grant funding with Minerva from Kunua Consulting. So that's another session that you don't want to miss, especially if you are a business owner or a nonprofit organization. So stay tuned for more information. And without further delay, I will close tonight's session. Thank you, everyone.
Great. All right.